Welcome back. This is Ask the Compound. I'm your host, Ben Carlson. Today, are tariffs a tax on consumers? We investigate with charts and everything. Stick around. Welcome back to Ask the Compound. Our email here, askthecompoundshow@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. I want to know where Duncan gets all his hats from. On today's show, we are discussing questions about the Australian housing market. Do we actually have it pretty good here, relatively, in the U.S.? The tax impact of owning rental properties. How to deal with an inherited IRA when you're not retired. A lot of those inheritance questions coming in. Retired planning for service members, another group that we have a ton of people asking in. Like, what do I do? I'm a service member. I have all this stuff to deal with. How do I do it? And are tariffs actually taxes? We got a lot of tariff questions this week. We bundled them all into one question. We'll go from there. All right, today's show sponsored by our friends at Public. If you're serious about investing, you need to check out public.com/ATC. You can invest in everything there. Stocks, bonds, options, crypto. Duncan probably tries to trade pink sheet stocks there, I think. You can also lock in with some of the highest yields. Rates are going down a little this week. You can open a public bond account and earn 6% or higher. Lock it in, individual bonds. I know there's plenty of people who watch this show who are nervous about individual bonds versus bond funds. Individual bonds at Public. Fund your account in less than 5 minutes at public.com/ATC. That's public.com/ATC, paid for by Public Investing. Full disclosures in the description.
You'd be proud of me. I actually have a treasury account there. So that's my responsible money.
Meaning what, like T-bills, money, cash?
Yeah, their treasury account where, I think it's 6 month.
Okay, you're not doing like zero coupon bonds?
No, not right now.
Okay, just making sure. All right, good questions. Good guest today. Let's do it.
And good chat. We've already got a bunch of people jumping in the chat. So if you're not in there, jump in the chat on YouTube and
hit us with a question on the chat. We'll answer it on the show.
Yeah,
we'll do it live.
We'll try to grab some stuff.
All right.
Okay. Up first, we got a question from Max. You guys have talked a lot about U.S. economic exceptionalism in recent years with the caveat that houses are too expensive. Fair enough, but check out housing prices in Australia, where I live. It's madness. People have been saying it's a bubble for years, while prices just keep going higher. I don't really have a question, just wanted to point out that prices in the States look tame by comparison. Cheers. We have a lot of people watching in Australia. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, we got a good audience there. I got to tell you, one of the things that I could never pull off, there's a few words I could never pull off saying fam. You're not going to ever catch me saying, hey, what's up,
Right.
fam?
Yeah.
Cheers. I can't do it. Like if I did a cheers in an email description, I feel like that's something that you have to be British or Australian. If you don't have an accent, you can't say cheers. No offense to people who use it, but it sounds better with an accent.
I think I agree. I've been testing out no worries more.
Okay.
It kind of works. I kind of like it.
Not bad. All right. I often hear a lot from our Canadian listeners about how, like, similar sentiments here. Like, yeah, you got it so bad. Because I have been saying in recent years, like, hey, listen, the economy's been doing pretty well. But if you are someone like Duncan and haven't bought a house, you're probably pretty angry. Fair, Duncan?
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Okay. So basically, we complain about the cost of housing here, but it could be much worse. So again, I've written a lot about the housing market in Canada in recent years, and I hear a lot from them. It's a similar breakdown in Australia. So the median price for an existing home in the U.S. is $410,000. I found in Australia, one of my sources said it's now $800,000 as of December 2024. Broke through $800,000. I think in Sydney, most of the sources I found were 1 million, 1.1 million. Now this is median. So median, remember, for people who didn't take their stats classes, median is middle. So that means half of the houses are more than that, right? So 800,000 is pretty high. Let's look at some historical gains. So Daniel, let's do a chart on for the first one. This is just on Y charts. I found the Australian House Price Index versus Case-Shiller National House Price Index for the U.S. This goes back to the late 1980s. You can see they've more than doubled our house price appreciation. And so over 1,000% in Australia, 410% or so in the U.S. Over the last 10 or 15 years, the gains have actually evened out a little bit, but their prices have just gone much higher, much faster than ours. I think it also helps to put these prices, anytime you look at them, into some sort of denominator. Barry always talks about denominator blindness, right? You can't just look at a big number on its own. You have to put it in context of something. So I always look at these things relative to income. So Daniel, let's do our next chart on here. What this one is showing us is the growth in housing prices versus the growth in disposable income. And I put them on the same scale and starting from the same point in 1975, just to make a point here. Now you can see the one in the US is obviously much smaller. It barely picks up any of the graph. The Australia one goes bananas. And you can see, surprisingly, a lot of the people in the US are surprised by this chart, that the fact that the US income and housing prices have more or less matched each other in lockstep for the past 50 years or so. And people would be surprised by this. It's only been in recent years that the US has seen it sort of level out a little. Daniel, put it up there one more time. But in Australia, it's like alligator teeth. Look at how wide it is. It's huge. So housing prices have grown much faster than incomes, and incomes in both countries have grown relatively similar. Now, let's do the next chart, Daniel, because some people will say, hey, wait, if you're doing cross-country comparisons, you have to look at it on a real basis. Same thing. I did it on a real basis. This is after inflation. The Dallas Federal Reserve does a great job of putting this data together. I update it once a year or so, and you can see same thing. In the U.S., incomes and housing prices more or less move in lockstep with one another. They kind of get a little off kilter if there's a bubble or something, but Australian housing prices have grown way faster than incomes. You can see in recent years, incomes in Australia have fallen on a real terms, while U.S. has kind of come back a little bit. So, Daniel, chart off. It's not great there, right? Much, much worse. So the housing prices have dwarfed income growth. And we have one more chart here that kind of puts this into context. This is Torsten Slok from Apollo. He looks at household debt to income. And this is kind of a similar way of looking at it, but just putting it on the same chart. In Canada and Australia, it's been going much, much higher over the years. The U.S., ever since the great financial crisis, has been falling as we've repaired our balance sheets. And mortgage debt makes up 70% of household debt in the U.S., something like that. I don't have the exact figures for Australia and Canada. I'm guessing it's a similar profile. So that's got to be the main culprit here, higher housing prices. Now, here's where it gets even worse for Australian homeowners. Daniel, one more chart. This shows our household debt to disposable income again, but on the same graph, it shows the percentage of mortgages which are variable, meaning like adjustable rate mortgages. And look at Australia up there on the right. So they have a much higher debt as a percentage of disposable income, and then they have something like 80 or 90% of those mortgages are adjustable rate. Now, what I found, I think the way that you do it is maybe you get your rate set for 5 years and then it resets. So people in the Australian housing market have seen a double whammy: rising prices, incomes that have not kept up, but also, as we've seen rates rise, they have had their mortgages reset to higher rates. And so they're getting screwed twice. If you locked in a 3% mortgage rate here, you feel just fine. You don't care about it. But there, you couldn't have locked it in for 20 or 30 years. You had that, for most people, that adjustable rate mortgage. So, is this going to make U.S. homeowners feel better about themselves or home buyers that are trying to buy right now? Probably not. I just wanted to point out, it could always be worse. And in many other countries, it is way worse. So I feel for my Australian brethren down under, where the toilet
how does that
goes
help
the
me
other
get
way.
a house, Ben? How does that help me get a house?
Well, it just takes one other market off of the marketplace for you. You can't buy in Australia either.
Okay.
And listen, I'm always available to come to Australia and give a speaking gig about this topic. If anyone wants to fly me down there, I'm free.
I'm not.
Okay?
I'm not
Just
doing
putting
that
it out
flight. Sorry, we'll have all the viewers from Australia, but I'm not doing that flight.
Oh, too long?
Yeah, I can't spend like a day on a plane.
Okay, but yes. So again, yes. When you look at this stuff on a relative basis, does it make people feel better if they still can't buy one in the U.S.? Probably not. I'm just saying things could be worse, and things may get worse if we go down the similar path, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's kind of crazy to actually do the math and see the difference in a 3% rate and a 6% or a 7% rate. That's the thing that's been mind blowing to me, is when you actually, like, I get it, it's obviously rates. A bigger number, but yeah, once you actually look at the difference on paper, it's pretty insane.
So someone in the chat said that they ended up leaving Canada for the U.S. and relative to the salaries, the housing is much more affordable here. That's interesting. I haven't heard many people do that coming down here. That makes sense. So anyway, appreciate all the Australian listeners. I'm sorry for your housing market, but if you've been a homeowner, you're doing just fine because you've seen extraordinary gains. So how about that?
Yeah, there you go.
All right, next question. How long of a flight is it? Do we know? 10 hours? 12?
No. I think it's a lot more. I think it's like 20 hours or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's like a crazy flight. Yeah, let us know. Let us know in the chat if you know.
I would just drink like 7 beers and take a long nap.
That's a really long nap.
Watch a bunch of movies. All right, next one.
Okay, up next we have a question that came in from Twitter. Wow, I guess this was in reference to last week. Wow, these charts really show how you can effectively manage your tax rates in retirement. If you have rental real estate, would you be able to use depreciation and losses to effectively get another $25,000 in tax-free income per year? I have
Okay,
no
so
idea
this
what any of this means.
so this question was actually about Bill's previous show that talked about tax-free income in retirement. So Daniel, show the charts real quick. Bill did, and I wrote a blog post about this showing that like you can actually shield a lot of income from taxes during retirement. Show the next one. Bill just kind of did this quick little how much you spend versus how much you pull out of your IRA or your brokerage, and what the tax rate is. And the tax rates were way lower than I thought they could possibly be. So let's bring on the man himself, Mr. Roth IRA, Bill Sweet.
I'm like
Hey, Bill.
Beetlejuice. If you say income tax 3 times, I just appear on your screen.
I thought it was Roth.
Rothification, right? Great topic, Ben. So,
All right,
yeah.
so Bill, if because we have plenty of people here who own rental properties, and we get questions about that stuff. And I think if I said if you own 5 or more,
Yeah.
that counts as a portfolio, Duncan? What did we call it? A fleet of houses?
An empire. I think I said.
Yeah, an empire. Okay. All right. So can we get taxes even lower for those people who own rental properties? And does it make sense to hold on to them in retirement, assuming you're not going to fix the leaky pipes every other week or something?
Yeah, I think it's actually called a murder of houses. I think that's what it's called. But the big picture on it is, I think what George was asking about, if we kind of reread the question, I guess it came in from Twitter, is this $25,000 loss limit. So that's kind of where I was going to go with this. So, the financial plan will answer the question on what should I do in retirement. But what I wanted to kind of talk about here, Ben, is that they're really, in the tax code, they're post-1986, 3 flavors of income. So Dan, can we pull up our first chart here? From our friend Professor Reagan, that ultimately I consider that the different types of income on the left here, active, passive, non-qualified investment. And these are the highest tax breaks that you can pay on ordinary income. On the right side of the chart, you see your qualified investment, capital gains, and losses. Those get a favored tax rate. However, Ben, what I wanted to point out was typically the default rule for active and passive is that you're not really able to mix the two. And so you don't really get to put these things all into a blender and marry your depreciation losses and your rental losses against your active income. Very generally, that is disallowed. However, have we got a deal for you in the U.S. tax code? And that if your income is below $150,000, you are able to take up to $25,000 of rental losses against your ordinary income. And that, I think, goes back to Twitter's question, which was, how do I do this in retirement? Well, again, one option is, if you happen to sink a bunch of money into rental property, you're able to keep your AGI below roughly $100,000. The answer is yes. If you do have rental losses, you are able to offset that against your ordinary income.
Why would you have a rental loss? Explain that to me.
So it's interesting. Basically, the tax code, if you go out and buy a big property, so houses are expensive. We just talked about that. Our Canadian brethren are paying a lot of money. Duncan is looking at houses probably north of $1 million. God bless him. But if you do that as a business, what you're not able to do is take the $1 million or $500,000 you used to buy a house and use that to offset your income. And the reason is you just bought an asset, right? You didn't spend that money on business stuff. You bought something that has value. And what the IRS says is you cannot take a full tax deduction for an asset all in year one. You need to depreciate it for the life of the property. And the tax tables decided through some magic of 1986 that 27 and a half years is the lifespan of a rental property. And so you're able to take 1/27th of the deduction per year. But Ben, what that does, as values of property have gone up over the last 6,000 years, property has tended to gone up. The depreciation deductions have gotten bigger and bigger relative to the amount of income that people are typically charging. What that does is it creates a paper loss that if you're below the income limit, you're able to offset other income with.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, the depreciation thing, I understand it, but I also don't understand it because then on the backside, if you sell the house, it effectively takes away some of your gain, correct?
That is correct.
Pulling it up front,
Yep.
but you're at the back end, you're not getting as much of a gain then, right?
That's exactly correct, is that it's a time arbitrage, right? So ultimately, if you're pulling forward the depreciation deduction, you're netting out your rental income. The value of the property on a book basis, tax book basis, decreases every year as you take these depreciation deductions. And unless you're constantly reinvesting in the property, at some point that goes to zero. You go to sell the property. You don't have a capital gain from when you bought the house. You have a capital gain less what you depreciated. And so, yeah, it ends up being kind of a tax time bomb if you're not careful with it.
So maybe not as great as a deal as this person is making it out to be.
It depends. So ultimately, what some people do, Ben, is they get a portfolio of properties, right? And they play this game. You end up having a larger, portfolio value because you're paying less taxes. And if you do a process called a 1031 exchange, you can effectively flip that gain and just push it forward and roll it forward right into retirement, which is why this is a very common practice for retirement income.
Yeah, I wonder how many people try to live off their rental income in retirement. If that's that's a fallback for a lot of people.
I think it's a pretty good strategy. It's passive income. It's not taxed by Social Security. So there are a lot of benefits. It's just the cost, right? You do have a pretty significant upfront cost. If you're borrowing 80% of that, you're paying that back in a mortgage. The net effect, you get a cap rate somewhere between 5 and 10%, right? So ultimately, I think you do have to compare that to other capital market returns.
Someone in the chat says 17 hours from Texas to Sydney. I could do that easy.
Yeah, I saw, I think 22, someone said, from New York City to Sydney. So yeah, I'm never doing that flight.
I would watch like 4 movies, take a long nap.
If you could do it away from the kids, right? It'd
That's
be
what
like
I mean.
a
No
vacation.
kids. Yeah, that's easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That sounds great to me.
All right.
Also,
let's
Bill,
do it.
you'll appreciate this, but talking about looking at housing, I found a cool house the other day that seemed like a pretty good deal. And then I pulled up a map to see how far it was from New York. It's in Rhinecliff, New York, which is like a 2-hour train ride from New York City. Just like, okay.
Just keep going
so
further out,
that's
Duncan.
that's the radius that I have to open up to.
Yeah, it's beautiful up there. Great Army Airfield, Air Force
It
Field.
looks cool.
Yeah,
All
great
right.
part of the country.
Up
Next
next,
question.
we have a question from George. I'm set to inherit part of my uncle's IRA, around $200,000. I'm in my early 30s. With the 10-year rule, do you think it's best to just take 10% out each year to spread out the tax burden? I have a steady job in banking, so I don't see my income fluctuating much. Lastly, I won't need the money as long as I'm employed, so I would be reinvesting any distributions into a brokerage account. Thoughts?
We've had plenty of inheritance questions over the years. Remember, someone wanted to know, like, when do I ask my parents how much I'm going to get, and how long are my parents actually going to live, or why aren't my parents giving me some money now? So these have been heating up, and I think it's going to be even more so in the future because the numbers are like $80 to $100 trillion in the next 20 to 30 years. I don't know how you actually estimate that, but it's a big number. So this one is pretty more straightforward than some of those other ones, though. And it's like a tax planning. So, Bill, you've talked about the 10-year rule before. Why don't you give us a refresher?
Yeah, so big picture, post-2020, if you inherit an IRA, George, I'm very sorry to hear about your uncle's passing. That does suck to lose an uncle at any age. But if that's the case, if you do inherit an IRA, you basically have 10 years, Ben, from the year that you inherit it to distribute 100% of the IRA. In most
So wait,
cases,
what did it used to be? I didn't know that was a newer rule.
Yeah, so the old rule was you either had 5 years, you could distribute the whole balance within 5 years, or you could take stretch IRA distributions according to your life expectancy. So as long as you started to take a distribution the year after inheritance, you could continue those distributions for the rest of your life, effectively creating a tax shield indefinitely. And Secure Act in 2019, 2020 said no longer. There's a time limit.
Pull
it's
it
10
forward.
years. Yep, exactly. Okay. And for most taxpayers, Ben, where it's going, there is not a requirement to do RMDs. And so George is asking, hey, should I defer? Should I wait? Should I sit on the money in an IRA? Or should I take annual distributions in some magnitude?
Is there any benefit to just ripping the Band-Aid off and doing it? Like then taking some money and putting it in a Roth or whatever? Or like what would be the benefit of actually taking it all at once?
Yeah, so we can't do a Roth conversion with inherited IRAs. That's a big no-no. That's a no-go. Okay. If you try to do that, your computer catches on fire. Yeah, it's really bad. But what you could do is leave the assets in. You could defer. And I did some math just at an equivalent tax rate. What we have to balance for George is the tax optimization of the deferral, right? Because if the assets are in an IRA for 10 years, that's not a small amount of time. Compounding at 7%, that should grow to $400,000. But it's
right. The money is still invested, even though it's in the IRA. It's still invested.
Yeah. You choose an investment plan, right? And hire maybe a company, maybe Ritholtz Wealth Management or another company to invest those assets for you on your behalf, or do it yourself. And ultimately, like I said, you can grow within that IRA and effectively shield it from taxes for a decade. And that's not a bad thing. We're in our 30s now. We're going to be in our 40s when we hit the 10-year limit. Again, not a terrible idea. But the problem, Ben, as you might imagine, if that's all ordinary income and you're kicking it all out in 1 year, what happens to your tax rate?
So in the 10th year, tax rate goes way higher.
Goes through the roof, right? Because you get a big bump. So you have to balance that versus taking smaller distributions, right, for the 10-year period. You can do them, every 5, you can do 20,000 a year. You can do whatever you want to do. There's no RMD for most taxpayers that inherit an IRA. But then you're paying the taxes along the way, right? So there's less money invested. And then you have to deal with tax drag in a non-qualified or brokerage account. And so I did a little bit of math. Dan, can we pull up chart 3 here that I gave to Dan? God bless Dan Parra. I gave this to him 4 minutes after the show started. If we take a look and do the math on this, the terminal value at an equivalent tax rate for $200,000, if you just do the tax deferral, peaks at $367, $400,000 of value, right, in that year 9 or 10. But then when you pay all the tax, you got to pay a big tax burden. You end up paying almost $100,000 of taxes, Ben, assuming a 30% rate. So you end up with $275,000. However, when I ran the math, doing $20,000 of distributions, your account value did not grow to the same much, right? Because you're forking over money to the IRS on an annual basis. And therefore, your terminal value, because you lose out on some of those compounding effects, was about $10,000 or $11,000 lower. However, there is a catch for this. Dan, can we chart off? And the catch is that's assuming an equivalent tax rate, right? And the problem is, George, we do not know what the tax rates are going to be in 2040. We don't know what they're going to be in 2035.
We don't know what his tax rate is going to be. Maybe he's a banker. Maybe he gets bigger bonuses. So I actually think psychologically, Dan, pull that chart up one more time. I think psychologically, taking the annual withdrawal would actually be easier to stomach, because if you had to write that huge check in the last year from the higher level, I feel like it would be more painful than just writing them each and every period, even though you could potentially get a higher. I just feel like emotionally, it would be way harder to write that bigger check from the higher level.
That's so fair? Interesting, Ben. So I would take the other side of that. And what I'm looking at is at the end of the process, if I wait and do nothing and just defer and get an equivalent, income rate, I end at $12,000 richer at the end of the process. And that's what I care about, Ben. I care about net worth, right? But ultimately, you are correct.
I'm thinking of it from a loss aversion perspective of that. I had this $370,000 almost, and now it goes all the way down and I pay a third of it in taxes. That's going to sting as opposed to paying them off. This depends on your emotional makeup. I'm thinking through the psychological landmines of this. That's all. But I think
it's a great debate. I think it's a great debate, right? So what are you trying to optimize for? And paradoxically, Ben, you are trying to optimize for, I think, behavioral management, right? How you feel about paying taxes. And therefore, if you want to minimize the amount of taxes you pay, sure, you can do it that way. However, you'll end up with less money at the end. And I would take the case, and probably Duncan too, chime in if you want. Like, I would want the more money, right? But I think the problem is we don't know. And so if George has the opportunity each year to sit down and make this decision in October, November, hey, is this a year? I didn't get the bonus I was expecting this year. I took a year off because I wanted to go hiking, hang out with my girlfriend, whatever else. Like, you can do this decision on a year-to-year basis, right? He doesn't have to make a 10-year decision today. He just has to decide how am I going to approach this? And I think a financial planner can really help.
That's true.
That.
If he's got certain years where he's got losses. Well, Duncan, Duncan would pay the taxes right away and YOLO the money into something.
Right. And we're going to get to T-shirts later on the show. But one of the things that is tattooed to my back is taxpayers hate paying taxes more than they like making money. And Ben, that's exactly what you just described. I think ultimately you have to make a decision that fits your financial circumstances and your loss tolerance.
Thing, though, this is found money, essentially. An inheritance is, especially from an uncle, this is found money. So you're paying the taxes using someone else's money. Now, it's technically yours now, obviously, but it's not like this is money that you saved. This is money that you were handed down to. So maybe that makes it easier to write that check.
Yep, and God bless him and your uncle.
Hey, Bill, in the chat, Seth asks, what about inherited IRAs? If you inherit an IRA and are over 73 years old, do you still have 10 years?
Yes.
Yeah, what happens if you're retired? Same thing?
Yes, same rules. Same rules apply. Yep, you get a 10-year clock. And if you are subject to annual distributions, which are for certain taxpayers, they're a lot higher in your 70s, as you might imagine. But most taxpayers, that's not the case.
Someone said there's no way you have that tattoo. I've seen it. It's really big. It's like almost as big as Ben Affleck's dragon on his back.
Yeah, well, I don't want to get banned from YouTube, so I'm not going to take my shirt off.
Also, if you're interested in hearing crazy tax rates, Bill and I were recently having a conversation about the Beatles tax rate that prompted George Harrison to write Taxman. Go read about that. It's insane.
Yeah, go look at U.S. tax rates from 1946 until roughly 1980.
Right, and Bears in the UK was like 90 or 95%.
So the Beatles are like the group of people who were paying them back then, huh?
Yeah.
All right, next question.
Up next, we got a question from Rob. Should those of us planning to retire from the military think differently about how we should be filling up our Roth, traditional, and taxable accounts? I'll be in the window to retire from the military in 3 years and have a pension of approximately $70,000 a year. My wife and I are 40 and 41 and have $660,000 of retirement savings, with 80% in Roth and 20% in traditional. We have less than $10,000 in brokerage accounts. I've prioritized Roth for the last 20 years, especially as Roth TSP became available. My assumption is that my retirement would fill up the majority of the lower tax brackets and that I'd be better off with Roth money in the long run. My ballpark need for retirement is $100,000 a year in addition to my pension. Should I keep prioritizing Roth? Is there a point where I should make my brokerage account more of a priority? Does it make sense to ignore traditional contributions? And
I
thank
was
you for your
thinking about
service.
Yeah, we always love our questions from service members who are serving our country. I feel like there's a Bill Sweet effect here because Bill was teaching all of the people he was serving with about their finances, and that's how you got into it, right, Bill? And I feel like people are just more aware in the military now of what's going on. So I'm giving you credit for that. It is funny to me.
I'll take it.
When you think about all the stuff that we talk about in the financial media, what stocks are doing what and what the earnings are. It's funny to me how many of the questions that we get are more along this lines of like, what accounts should my money be in, right? Not like, should I get out of stocks and go into bonds, or it's more like, where's the best, most optimal place for money to be? And I guess the idea here, Bill, is like, should your choice of tax deferral account versus taxable account, should it change because you have that military pension to fall back on? Is that kind of what they're getting at here?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. But I think if you take a look at the age, Rob is going to be 44, Ben, when he hits a retirement window. And that is pretty incredible. Being somebody who's north of the age of 44 now, thinking about being retired with a $70,000, annual pension that could potentially be state income tax free.
So the math on
awesome.
these is depending on how many years of service you've had, and that's when you're eligible for the pension?
Yeah, correct. And so because Rob ended up joining service prior to 2015, there was some reform that happened at that time. He basically needs to put 20 years in and then, gets a lifetime pension because, Rob, his wife, they're putting their lives on the line, right? Similar to police officers, similar to fire folks. And the pension system is set up to do that. However, it did change in 2015. It's more tilted towards a TSP match these days. But it sounds like Rob has filled up a lot of buckets because he not only has that bucket, the pension bucket, but has also well-funded a TSP. And I guess to get directly to Rob's question, does it make sense to prioritize a Roth? I would say yes, Ben, because a Roth IRA at age 44, assuming he rolls it out of the TSP into an IRA, he can get his basics back, right, anytime tax-free. And even up to your 40s, whereas more traditional assets, you have to wait until age 59 and a half to touch those. And if you end up, God bless you, end up retiring from active duty service in your mid 40s, that's a 15-year long window. I think Rob is probably, I'm not sure what retirement is going to look like, Rob. Again, this might be something to sit down with a certified financial planner and discuss. My guess is we're going to find another employment opportunity out there somewhere. But I would argue, Ben, that Rob's doing exactly the right thing. I think a Roth asset is extremely flexible and can allow you basically the ability to tap into that if needed or if wanted to purchase a house, to take a couple of years off, whatever it is the case may be.
Especially if you mentioned it's early retirement. It gives you more options. That's always a question we get from people like, hey, I'm retiring in my late 40s or early 50s or mid 50s. I have to bridge the gap between until I can take those more traditional retirement assets. What do I do? A Roth.
That's exactly correct.
Is a pretty flexible point.
Yeah, and Dan, can you pop up my image here? So roughly a year ago, February 2024, I got an invitation from Major Steve Fennessy, since promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, to basically give a quick class at the University at USMA, the United States Military Academy at West Point. It was a big privilege, and I really enjoyed it, Ben, talking about the military financial advantage, something that we said, when we were training, digging a ditch ain't making you rich. Like very rarely does working in the military and the armed services lead to, let's say, a higher income. However, I do think that the U.S. tax code and the U.S. government does a pretty good job of taking care of U.S. service members. They do not have to pay tax, for example, on their housing benefits. Healthcare is 100% covered. If you ever are worried about your health insurance, there's a great way to solve for that problem. That's to join the armed services. You basically get to see the world for free, right? I was born in Germany, Ben, got to bounce all over Europe and got to visit the Middle East, got to visit all kinds of exotic places and shoot weapons at people over there. No state income tax.
You've been in the military since birth?
Well, my dad was, so I mean, in a way. VA loans cover education, so there are a lot of perks, I think, that are intangible that come from military service, and I think that is an honorable place to go. So, Duncan, I want to echo your sentiment. Rob, thank you very much for your service, and wish you a very happy retirement. We'd love to help you at Ritholtz.
So, from your talk to these service members, do you get the sense that they are better informed now than people were in the past when you were serving?
I certainly think so, and it's a democratization of information. I think happened post internet, but then keep in mind too, like at USMA, these are college students, right? So I'm speaking to folks that are pursuing an education, and that is less than I think 20-30% of the armed services. So like the majority of armed service members are enlisted, and that doesn't necessarily mean they don't have a college degree. A lot of non-commissioned officers do, but yeah, I think there's a bit of selection bias here, Ben. That like these are the officers that are thinking about personal finance. However, again, I took that privilege on. I think it's a good thing to do because because it's your job as a military officer to train your soldiers. You're responsible for their health, morale, welfare, education, their shots, their vaccination schedules. If your soldier gets in jail, it's your job to go get him out. And so I think that burden is something the military officer takes on. And so I think having an educated background on this stuff is very useful, so you can sit down and educate your soldier, help them not make that high interest, loan payment on the Dodge Charger or whatever the case may be.
And bigger picture, the TSP is the program that you've talked about before, Ben, right? That all government employees have access to?
Thrift savings program, yep.
Okay.
What I think is the best retirement plan that there is.
I agree. Me and Ben have lobbied Congress to open that up to the people,
Yes.
to the people's IRA. Yeah, it's a great program, but as a benefit, it exists, a very, very low cost, and a big fan.
If Trump wants to make me the retirement czar, I'd be happy to implement this across the country for anyone who wants a 401k plan.
I'm with you. Let's go to D.C. Who's with me?
All
Do
right.
they have access to privates?
We got one more question.
Okay, up next we have a question from John that is short and sweet. I love this. I'll keep this one simple. Are tariffs a form of taxes?
All right, my answer is it's a sales tax, Bill. Is that fair? Essentially, it's a sales tax.
Yeah, I think it's complicated. My big picture answer is I don't think we know, right? We haven't had a protectionist regime while being the world's biggest trading partner. But the thing I want to pop up, Dan, can we pop up my my image here of Senator Orrin Hatch? This is from a Scott Lincecum blog post in 2018. This would be my general comment, and you can put it on a T-shirt. Tariffs not only impose immense economic costs, but they also fail to achieve their primary policy aims and foster political dysfunction along the way. That, to me, Ben, says everything I think there is to
Tell us how
say
you really feel.
about tariffs.
We had some
And
good
he's
charts.
super liberal, right?
Hatch?
I'm just kidding.
I don't know.
He's
All right, we got a couple of charts here from Matt, our chart kid. So Daniel, throw up the first one. This is just shows the tariff rate on U.S. goods. This is like proposed. Okay, this is what it's been historically. So there were a lot more tariffs back in the 30s, early 20th century, and one of the reasons for that was because so much of the manufacturing was in every different country that you didn't have to worry as much about free trade around the globe. So the reason that these have fallen over time is because there's been more trade through different countries. Daniel, one more chart. Next one just shows what's the impact on inflation. And this is using some assumptions from Russell, and essentially it shows this is the inflation rate, like from the high end of tariffs versus like some smaller tariffs. How much could it add to inflation? And you can see it's essentially like a one-time bump. So if we get all these tariffs, it adds to the prices, but then it kind of just, the inflation rate goes back to where it was. And that makes sense to me because it's kind of a one-time deal. Now, we've been arguing for the past 3 years, like, yeah, okay, the inflation rate has come back down, but the price level is still higher. So that's something that doesn't make people very happy. So we shall see if these tariffs continue to be implemented and if they are here for the long term. How people would feel about those price hikes. But it's, to your point, Bill, it's not as easy as it seems of just like, add this to the price. It's hard to see.
Yeah, it's more complex. Can I try a contrarian take? Because I'm with the T-shirt. If you want to know my real feelings of the T-shirt, but let me try a spicy take on you guys.
Bring it.
How many Amazon boxes do you get in a week?
I feel like I need to hire someone to come break them down with a razor blade in my garage for me.
Duncan, you?
18.
Ballpark? 18? Yeah, so like we just live in this modern consumerist culture. And if you ended up raising the prices of like the lowest priced crap on Amazon that we all order, I mean, stuff that's just on my desk. I have some ski goggles. I have a Nest Power connector. Why do I have this? I saw it on Amazon. I was like, I need to want that, right? And I got it. But my argument, potentially, I don't actually think this is, like maybe we should have some trade barriers up, right? To kind of slow the amount of consumerist stuff that we have. Because if I were to take you guys a tour downstairs into my basement, you would be horrified. And you'd be like, how is this person running the financial operations of a
Bill,
large
in this
company?
country, we consume.
We consume
It's what we do
stuff.
best.
Right.
We love to buy stuff.
Right.
And
So like slowing the amount of incoming stuff, to me, maybe not a bad idea, but I think ultimately, yeah, it is a cost that consumers are going to bear, Ben, and dollars that you're spending on the stuff you're buying from Amazon will not be spent at restaurants and everywhere else.
And
So
depending on
ultimately,
which countries the tariffs are applied to, it's probably going to be, it's not like everything's going to rise in price. It's going to be certain targeted areas. And I think that's the thing, that it's not like everything's going to just all of a sudden see a 10% increase or something. And the way you think about it too is that it's as goods come into the country, that's when the tariff is applied. But then you have a markup for retail, and it's like, so the markup won't necessarily be exactly what the tariffs cost, right? Because you're putting the tariff on at the cost or whatever. It's kind of wonky economic stuff, but it would probably be certain industries and products more than others.
Yeah. And my big thesis is I don't think anybody knows, Ben, because we are responsible for 50, 60% of trade, and it is an import-based economy. And I don't think we actually know what happens when we put up trade barriers.
And guess what? To your point about like maybe people will consume less, if we do get higher prices, my guess is people will just pay them.
They'll just complain and they'll pay them.
Yeah,
higher prices.
I don't. Yeah, and I don't want to minimize that, right? I mean, they're hardworking people, right? They are living paycheck to paycheck. So, like adding a 10% tax to their consumption, like that's not a great thing. So I don't want to minimize the economic pain that some people are feeling.
Well, I'm not an economist, but I'm from a town that was decimated by jobs going to China. I'm from High Point, North Carolina, which was the furniture capital of the world at one point. Yeah. But I just don't see a world where all those jobs come back and the factories reopen in High Point and people are making furniture. Are people in High Point even wanting to go into jobs where they're making furniture in factories again? You know, I don't know that that's something that's going to play out. But
yes, that transition was very painful, but we are now a service technology economy, for better or worse. Right? Yeah, Grand Rapids, where I live, it was where they manufacture all the furniture. And they don't do a lot of it here anymore.
I mean, not more than High Point though, right? I mean,
office furniture, all the office furniture, all the big office furniture, Steelcase and Hayworth and Herman.
We need to settle this with a duel. Yeah. Thunderdome. Whose town created better furniture?
I have better desks than you. Yes, North Carolina is don't they have like the huge 10,000 square foot furniture stores down there or whatever?
Yeah. A massive chest of drawers, massive chair in Thomasville. Yeah, we got it all.
So this week was Groundhog Day. Bill, as a tax person, do you have to even look at your shadow, or do you just go back into a hole for 3 months with tax season coming up now? Is that
No, that's it. And I never really minded the grind during tax season because I hate being cold. I don't want to be outside this time of year when my hands get clammy and kind of frozen. I just want to leap out of a window and go back into my bed. So I think, Ben, the big synopsis is I didn't choose this life. This life chose me.
That's right.
Also, can I do one just fun little question for you guys on tariffs since they're so fun? If you could slap a tariff on anything, what would you slap a tariff on?
Ooh.
Oh, that's easy for me.
Okay.
Trucks.
Yeah, I knew
Ford
you were
F-150.
I knew you were
How dare you?
Trucks.
How dare you, sir?
You're talking to someone who drives a Raptor, right?
Yeah, the hardworking Americans.
I was going to say auto-tune in music.
I've got one. Friends reruns. I don't want to ever watch another Friends rerun. The one with Joey, slaps his hands around.
I'm here for it. I like
10% tariff on all Friends reruns. Make it 50%.
I'm shorting that take, Bill. I'm one of these people who think Friends is still watchable to this day.
Live in the present. It was 30 years ago.
All right. Oh, someone says I should have said coffee. That's a good one because it wouldn't impact me at all.
No. Don't.
No, but my wife drinks more coffee, like enough to kill a elephant or something.
Ben, pro-tariff, anti-coffee. Great way to end the show.
All right. If you have an email,
Anti-F-150s.
If you have a question for us, email us askthecompoundshow@gmail.com. Leave us a review. Subscribe to The Compound. What else? Check out the podcast if you're watching live. Get in the chat. We love all the people in the chat, and we'll see you next time.
See you, everyone.
External revenue.